Shalom Aleichem to one and all. Today is Rosh Chodesh Shevat, the first day of the month of Shevat. According to our calendar, the year is Tavshin Pei Wow, corresponding to the 19th of January 2026, according to the Gregorian calendar. You should now be able to see the beginning of Perek Wow, chapter 6 of Sefer Yirmiyahu. Actually, technically speaking, to be more precise, what I should do is to go back 2 Pesukim. I think that's where we ended last time, and also that is how the text is broken up in the Tanakh before us, according to the Masorah, because chapter 5, verse 30, Perek Pasuk Lamed, says as follows. You should be able to see that now. Shama v'sha'arura niyatha ba'ares. Which refers to something scandalous, something outrageous going on in Eretz Yehuda, in Mamlechet Yehuda, the kingdom of Yehuda. I want to share something else with you. I prefer the Targum, the text of the Targum from on this site. You can see at the bottom, Pasuk Lamed. Shama v'sha'arura niyatha ba'ares. The translation in Targum Onkelos is Tema ushno hawo ba'ara. Tema is something which causes people to be amazed. Lithma is to be surprised or to be amazed at something. Ushno, something which is out of order, something which is not the way it should be, like the word shinui. Something is wrong. And what is wrong? The Pasuk goes on to say, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, as you can see at the bottom, Hanevi'im nibba'u v'shaker. The prophets, that is to say, the false prophets. And we know there are always 2 kinds of prophets: those who are really real prophets and those who claim to be prophets. Just as you have 2 kinds of chachamim: those who are truly chachamim and those who would like to be seen and thought of as chachamim. And one has to be able to differentiate between the 2. And that's not always very easy. And that is why many people go astray. Many people follow, just as in the time of Yirmiyahu, many people were following false prophets, believing people who set themselves up as Nevi'im, who spoke in the name of Hashem, and told them things will be okay. Do not believe Yirmiyahu and people like Yirmiyahu. They're just naysayers. They're conspiracy theorists, and foretellers of doom. But no, things will be okay. So sometimes you find the word Nevi'im in the Nevi'im referring to Nevi'ei Sheker. So it says here, HaNevi'im nibba'u v'sheker. They prophesy falsely. V'haKohanim yirdu al yidehem. And the Kohanim, who were high status people in positions of power, the priests, they allow themselves to be supported and confirmed in their positions of power by these Nevi'ei Sheker. In other words, the Kohanim say, what we're telling you is also what these Nevi'im are telling you. So you should believe us. We're speaking the truth. Look, that's what they say as well. And Yirdu Ali Dehem is an interesting expression. We'll see in a moment what that might mean. Wa'ami ohavu chen, and my people seem to accept this. They seem to like it. That this position, the situation is okay. Uma ta'asu la haritha, and therefore, what can be done for my people? What can be done for these people? The Targum of Onkelos, of Yonathan, Targum of Yonathan ben Uziel says here at the bottom, you can see Lamed Aleph, Nive'esh Shikra Mithnaban Shakar, the false prophets speak false things. And the Kohanim, now the expression, the translation, the Targum of Yonathan is that the Kohanim yirdu alidehem. He explains that the Kohanim support and agree and encourage people to believe the Nevi'im, not the other way around. That these false prophets are supporting the Kohanim and confirming and affirming what they say. The other way around. But either way, they're in cahoots. They're working together. In other words, this is the deep state of the time of Yirmiyahu. It's not a joke. This is not a joke. This is for real. The Nevi'im in general were almost without exception were opponents of the deep state of their time, and as later usually were the Chachamim who were the Talmidim, the students of the Nevi'im, and Talmidei Talmidim Shalan Nevi'im. They were opposed to those who wielded power falsely and those who acted deceitfully and spoke against them. The Nevi'im spoke against them. Sometimes they were persecuted for so doing, as were Chachamim in later times. The Nevi'im, so this Pasuk, Lamed Aleph, speaks about Nevi'im, as we explained. These are Nevi'ei Sheker, and they are part of the deep state. They support the current establishment. They say, believe the kings, believe the Sarim, the ministers, his advisors, go according to what the Kohanim tell you. They're speaking the truth. And Yirmiyahu is complaining, Wa'ami ohavu chen. My people seem to go along with this state of affairs. Umat ta'asu laharitha. And therefore, Jonathan says, Wa'ami rahimu chen. My people seem to like this state of affairs. Umat ta'abdun lasofa. What can be done? What can be done for such a people, for people who insist on working in this fashion, thinking in this fashion, and accepting the lies because they're convenient, they're comfortable. It's usually the case. Nevi'ei Sheker, false prophets, and Chachmei Sheker. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov refers to certain Rabbanim, unfortunately, in his time, that he referred to them as Rabbanim Shel Sheker, and sometimes he referred to them as Rabbanim Shel Erev Rav. The thing that clearly marks out such people, and such people, of course, exist in our time as well. Unfortunately, this is a problem. It's a problem because this puts the onus of having to examine reality and think things through for yourself. That onus devolves onto the average Jew. Every Jew has to decide which kind of person do I listen to. This was true. This has always been the case in all situations. This was true, if you recall, 21 years ago, for example, in the time of the dictator and the criminal Ariel Sharon's destruction of Gush Katif. There was no shortage of wise men, so to speak, some of them known as Rabbanim, who told you this is a good idea, it's fine. This is what the security experts tell you. This is what things will be. This is, as Sharon himself famously claimed, it's recorded, you don't have to believe me, that this will improve our security, etc. Well, there are a lot of people who said these things and went along with it. And there were plenty of Rabbanim who said, yes, and you have to follow such orders and you have to do these things, etc., etc. And that was, of course, the more convenient approach to adopt. It's much easier for a soldier to say, I'll follow orders, than to say, I will examine the order and think about it. And if I think that I may not follow this order, it is forbidden for me to do so, I will say so and I will not do it. That requires courage, and that is difficult. And so nothing is new. En hadash tahad hashamash. There is nothing new under the sun. This is always the case. People who are not willing to grapple with uncomfortable facts and difficult realities and always choose the easy path are almost always in the majority. And the truth seekers are almost always in the minority. That, unfortunately, has been traditionally and historically the way of the world. And so it was in the time of Yirmiyahu, and that's what Yirmiyahu is describing and bemoaning this fact. And now, the next pasuk, which is pasuk Aleph, chapter 6, verse 1. Ha'izu b'nei Binyamin mikarev Yerushalayim ובתקוע תקעו שופר, ועל בית הכרם שאו מסעת, כי רעה נשקפה מצפון ושבר גדול. So what does this pasuk say? According to the Targum, which you can see here, גלו בני בנימין מגו ירושלים. הרי כל סיבחת קרנה השתמעת בארהון. In other words, the people of Binyamin who reside in Yerushalayim. In other words, Binyamin is the area to the immediate north of Yerushalayim. And some of them lived in Yerushalayim or next to Yerushalayim. They had moved southward into Yerushalayim for whatever reason. The Navi is telling them, leave Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim is about to be attacked and destroyed, and therefore save yourselves. Gelo, Machon Galuth. B'nei Binyamin, those of you from Binyamin who are in Yerushalayim, leave. The sound of shofar, and the shofar was the siren system in the ancient world of warning of approaching danger. The sound of the shofar is going to be heard. وعلى بيت بقعة كرمية زكفوا عممية سمواثهن. The foreign peoples who are coming to attack are on their way. Great evil is about to come from the north being Bavel, which is northeast of Eretz Yisrael. Pasuk Gimel. Now, before we continue on to Pasuk Gimel, I want to see if I can. So look at Radak. Hanisu. The word ha'izu is hanisu. In other words, flee, leave where you are. Kamo shalah ha'izet miknecha. We see this pasuk in Sefer Shemot. In other words, remove your flock over there before the plague comes. Amal ivnei Binyamin shehem Yerushalayim. The Navi says to the people of Binyamin who are in Yerushalayim, or maybe in small hamlets around Yerushalayim, Atem Binyamin nusu. Flee. V'hanisu et asher lachem mikerev Yerushalayim. Kol sheken mishar arechem. Leave quickly from all around Yerushalayim. Ki afilu Yerushalayim tilached. Because even Yerushalayim, the great walled, fortified city, is about to be taken. ומה שאמר העיזו הוא דרך גוזמה, כי אין להם מקום, אנו ינוסו שם, אלא כאומר, אם יש לכם מקום שתנוסו. In other words, it's sort of wishful thinking. You haven't really got where to run. But if you do, go, נוסו. והניסו מקרב ירושלים, כי גם היא תילכד. ירושלים הייתה ליהודה ובנימין. Because Yerushalayim was, although technically it is more in the Nahla, the territory of Shevet Yehuda, more than in the territory of Binyamin, but actually the border of Binyamin begins in Yerushalayim, so in Yerushalayim itself, even in fact on Har HaBayit. So Yerushalayim was actually considered like the capital of both Yehuda and Binyamin. Okay, we continue. Pasuk Beth. Hanawa v'hamu'unaga damithi Bat Sion. In other words, Bat Sion, the people of Yerushalayim, are like a pampered woman, a woman who is used to luxury. As the Targum says, Ya'itha umfankatha erden kalket yath or hathich dechen behetath kenishta the Sion. In other words, your ways have become corrupt, and terrible things are about to happen to you. For example, it goes on to say in Pasuk Gimel, Elaha yavo ra'im wa'edrehem. To you, Yerushalayim, and to the environs of Yerushalayim, are about to appear Ru'im wa'edrehem, literally shepherds and their flocks. We'll see in a moment what this means. Taki'u aleha ohalim saviv ra'u ish et yado. The Targum explains, Pasuk Gimel, La yethon malachin umashal yothahon. In other words, the Ro'im refers to malachim, kings. I'm not talking about shepherds and flocks of sheep or goats. We're talking about the leaders of great nations, and their armies are about to descend upon you. Yethon malchin umashal yothahon, and their armies. Yigedun ala, they will gather around you. Mashkenin, sahor, they will set up their tents and their camps around Yerushalayim. Yisay'un gevar yav havre, and one will help the other. In other words, as is usual, both today and in the ancient past, again, nothing is new. The Bavlim didn't act entirely alone. They had subordinate kingdoms and vassals who went wherever they had to go. If the big king says to the little king, you come and help me make war against Yerushalayim, so they come. So there were a number of nations involved. The Bavlima are mentioned always because they were the leading power. Pasuk Dalet, Kadashu ala milhama, kumu wa'na'ala v'thahoraim. Let us now make war against Yerushalayim, and let us rise up against the Thohorai means midday. The word Thohar is a shnav, is a skylight. So it's when the middle of the day, much light enters through the skylight into the house. So the middle of the day, when it's brightest, when the sun is at its height, is referred to as Thohoraim, as if you're standing directly under the skylight. Oy lanu kifana hayom ki inoto silale arev. The Targum states, Zaminu ala avadeh karava. In other words, when it says in the pasuk over here, pasuk in Dalet, kadushu ala milhama, that means bring on the avadeh karava, those who do battle, the warriors, the armed forces. Kumu venisak b'tehara, that is the Aramaic word for midday. It means the brightest time of the day. Why lana are pena yoma are negadu tole ramsha. And what is this referring to? We need to look at the Mefarshim. Radak says, if you can see over here, the Radak says, Kadashu alea milhama, Omer ish lahaviro miharoim. In other words, the kings speak one to the other. The leaders of the various armies discuss their plans. Omer ish lahaviro miharoim zamanu milhama al Sion. Prepare your plans for making war against Sion, Yerushalayim. Klomar afalpi she'ra'u ish et yado kulam zimnu asma lemilhama al Sion. Although they're separate, they're all coming together to work together against and to make war against Yerushalayim. Why is it referring to the middle of the day, and why is it referring to the afternoon? It speaks about kifana hayom. The day is coming to an end. Radak explains, Amar pasuk shahara kumu v'na'aleh balayla. Then later we find the pasuk that speaks about rising up against Yerushalayim. Pasuk hey, it says kumu v'na'aleh balayla. Let us rise up against it at night. What is going on here? Night and day. What's being referred to? Zachar Thohoraim Walaila Lafisha Hem Zmaneh HaPiraim. In other words, this is when trouble is when it gets dark. כמו שאמר מדבר באופן יהלך מכתב ישוד צהריים, the pasuk in Tehillim also speaks about times of day when danger is more likely. אמרו בזמנים קשים להם עולה עליהם. We shall rise up against them when it is the most difficult time for them. אמר הנביא, אוי לנו כפנו היום. כלומר, בצהריים שומרים אויבינו לרעה הוא לנו ולא לטובה. Why is the midday or the afternoon not good for us? כי צהריים קשה לרוב החום. The afternoon, the middle of the day and the afternoon is when the heat is most difficult in the summer. And that is when war was usually done in the summer months, not in the winter, because of the rain and the mud, etc. ועתה יפה לרוב האורה, ואנחנו ניקח ממנה הרע ולא הטוב. כי לנו חשך היום, וזהו כפנה היום. כלומר, האור פנה לו לדרכו, והסללים הם נוטים, ומתפשטים כי אין לנו אורה אלא חשיכה. In other words, things are getting, it's like the afternoon towards evening begins to become, the night begins to fail, becomes more difficult to see things. In other words, this is an indication that things are getting worse. So the Navi is referring to the fact that the evil times are just beginning and things are going to get steadily worse. As the next Pasuk says, Pasuk Hey states, Kumu wan'aneva laila wanashchita al menotheha. The Targum states, Kumu wanisak belelia, let us rise up against it at night, unhabel biran yathaha, and let us destroy. Now, what is that word in the Aramaic? The word armonotheha in the Hebrew, Armon is often translated as a palace, but it doesn't have to refer only to a palace. It refers to great, important, powerful buildings, impressive-looking buildings. And that is what the Aramaic term refers to. Biran Yathaha refers to, a bira is often a powerfully built fortress, some large, imposing building is a bira. And that is what it refers to here as well. I think also that the word which we find in Chazal occasionally, which is biryonim. Have you heard that word, biryonim?
Yeah, sure.
So how would you translate that word today?
A bully.
A bully, a thug.
Yeah.
Some kind of a person well used to and prone to violence, shall we say, right? That's a biryon. So I think, as I understand it, the word biryon, and Chazal use the term biryoneh, actually comes from this word bira, or biron yathaha, because if you have a palace or a fortress or some kind of important government building which you need to protect, then what you surround it with guards, and these guards are thugs. They project and broadcast their intention to do you harm if you come close, correct?
Yeah.
And they're known as those people who guard the bira, and those who guard the bira are the biryoneh, and that's so you get the idea.
Yeah.
Pasuk well. כי כה אמר אדוני צבאות, כי רפו עשה ושפכו על ירושלים סוללה, היא העיר הופקד כולה עושק בקרבה. So the Navi is expressing the fact that Hashem has decided that Yerushalayim is going to come under attack and is going to be besieged. The Targum says here in Pasuk, which you should be able to see here on the left, Are kidnon amar Adonai Tzevaoth kuthu. In other words, cut down the forests, the trees round about. Yerushalem milletha, and a solala, which you find in the Hebrew, is translated here as milletha. In other words, we're talking about building ramps, siege ramps, right? You have a walled city. How do you there are a few ways of attacking such a such a outpost, an enemy city which is walled and protected. You can either undermine the wall, so the wall collapses, or you can build a ramp up against the wall so that your soldiers can climb up, walk up the ramp, and then enter the city. So, and you do this by building structures with wood and filling it with lots of beaten earth, etc. And this is how you, that's what it's referring to. Milethar is the fill, the landfill that you create, this filled area with beaten earth, and you create a ramp which your armed forces can walk up against into the city. He kabta the ith pekidula hovaha. This is the city Yerushalayim. The sins of which city are now being visited, or as it were, being looked at. Kulhon anosim b'chawa, which is a translation of kula oshek b'kirba. In other words, Yerushalayim is full of iniquity, full of oshek. Oshek is usually sinful activity connected to money. In other words, extortion, stealing, that sort of thing. And the Radak explains, if you can see the Radak over here. Klomar, me'eth Hashem hayatha. What is about to happen is not by chance, it is from Hashem. Ki hu roseh lashchitha. Hashem wishes to destroy Yerushalayim, even though that's a terrible thing to say. But Hashem wills this. Lashchitha v'ha'ireth ruham lavo ele. Hashem caused these goyim, these nations, to come up against Yerushalayim. Uchilu amar lahem kirthu isa, as if he said to them, go and cut down the trees and make your siege preparations. And he goes on to explain, Amar, you see over here, kirthu isim la'asot mehem dayek. Dayek is a ramp. ולשפוך סוללה על ירושלים, והם האבנים שמשליכים בדייק וכדומה לו על העיר לנתוס חומותיה ומגדליה. ולדעת יונתן, and according to the Targum, סוללה היא תל גבוה, what I described as a ramp, in other words, a high raised area. שתרגום סוללה מלאתה, והוא ששופכים עפר ועצים תוך החפירות אשר סביב העיר עד שממלאים אותם בעפר Wa'isim, etc., etc., as we explained. All right. We go on to Pasuk Zayin. Kehakir bayir memeha, ken hekera ra'atha. Hamas washod yishama ba al panai tamid holi umaka. In other words, Hashem is describing what he sees in Yerushalayim. Now we have two words. We have the word be'er and the word bayir, and they're related because they both refer to something from which water flows. So a bayir is like a pool, basically, of water, and a be'er is something which you dig, and you dig down into the earth until you hit water. So just as a well or some pool of water produces water which flows from it constantly, that's the meaning of the words kehakir bayir memeha, as the Targum says, kehuba. Guba is a pool or some pool of water, dimekayem mohi, just as which the water is kept there and remains there and is constantly flowing from it. Ken orichu v'itkayamu b'chawa avadeh vishtah. So just as a well or some pool of water, some water system produces water on a regular, reliable basis, ken hekera ra'atha, so the evil flows out of Yerushalayim. It's a very difficult, very tough description. Yerushalayim was like a source of evil doing. Of course, if you listen to the news today, what goes on in the Israeli deep state, then you know exactly what's being referred to. Mm-hmm. Every day there we have new revelations of the almost unfathomable evil of certain people. And this is, and Yerushalayim at that time was also unfortunately, a corrupt place. So the Navi says, just like a well or some water system produces water and which flows from it all the time, ken hekera ra'atha, so the evil flows from Yerushalayim. Hamas washod yishama' ba al panay tamid holi umaka. The Targum says, Kal hatofin uvazozin mishtema ba kadamai tadira al ken ethiti ala mara umaha. Because I hear constantly the cry of those who are harmed and treated in a terrible manner by these evildoers in this city of mine. I hear the cries of such people. I hear the Hamas washod yishamaba al panay tamid holi umaka, and therefore I bring upon them evil and destruction. He was Sari Yerushalayim, Pasuk Heth. He was Sari Yerushalayim, pen teka' nafshi mimech. Pen asimech shemama aras lo noshava. In other words, take note and beware, people of Yerushalayim, lest I am so I feel such revulsion towards you that I will destroy you completely. He was Sari Yerushalayim pen tekan nafshi mimech, lest my soul, as it were, be unable to stomach you any further. Pen asimech shemama eretz lo noshava. The Targum says in Pasuk Het over here, Ithreda Yerushalayim, in other words, take note and take to heart and be very concerned. Dilma yerahek memori yathicha, lest I remove you completely from my sight. Dilma asher wenach sadia, lest I make you desolate. Ka'ara Sodom, like the country of Sodom. Dala Ethiyatavat. In other words, just like Sodom and Amorah were destroyed and were never resettled. If you go to the area of Sodom and Amorah today, you see what kind of desolation there is there, and to this day there is nothing, no settlement there. Lest I make you into such a place, says the Targum. Let us continue to Pasuk Tef. Ka'amar Adonai Tzebaoth Olel Yi'olelu Chagefen Sherit Yisrael Hashev Yadecha Kevoser Al Sarsiloth. Here it's comparing Yerushalayim to a vineyard which is being harvested, where the grapes are being picked and removed from the vines. And the Targum says over here, Kidnan Amar Adonai Tzebaoth Ith Bezaza Ith Bazazun. They shall be, as it were, picked dry. They shall be completely consumed by their enemies. Kamod mehalchin al sholei refan lemiktaf sharad Yisrael, as a vine is picked clean of its fruit. Wa'od tathuv mahathach alehon kid katof al salsalin. In other words, you can remove the vine, the fruit of the vine, in such a way that something is left. Some of the grapes remain, or you can pick it clean completely. The meaning of the pasuk here is disputed by the Mefarshim. Let's look at at Rashi first. Rashi says, Olel. What are the ololoth on the geffen? What does the word ololoth refer to when speaking of a vineyard or a vine? Rashi says, La'ahar shebasaru hakerem, after the people who pick the grapes from the vine, nisharu ololoth. There are some small grapes that remain, which the pickers didn't bother with. Maybe they're not so good for making wine or whatever. They leave them aside. And then the poor come, and that is why we're chayav to leave. Also, we are required to leave something on the vine for the aniyim to pick afterwards. The aniyim ba'im wa'olim. They take them for themselves. What is left? Ken yavozu yahzaru yavozu. In other words, Yerushalayim will be totally picked dry. So, according to Rashi, that is what should happen to them. But then the pasuk says, "Hashev yadecha kevoser al sarsilot." Rashi says, "Ata hasoneh, you the enemy, Hashev yadecha lishlosh shenit kevoser hameshiv yado al sarsilot hamesarsel umahapes ha'olalot v'chen hayatha mishe higlat Yehoyakim v'haracho himlichet Yechonya v'hazar lesof shelosha chodashim v'higlahu hazar lesof." In other words, just as the harvest of the grapes can be done in waves. First, there's the main harvest, and then you have the small things left on the vine, which you can either leave or you can return to harvest those as well, to pluck them from the vine as well. So it was in the time of the Churban Beit Rishon. First, Yehoyakim was sent into Galuth, and he was killed, and Yechonya was made king instead. And later, he came and removed the last kings. That is to say, Yechonya and Tzidkiyahu. But the main Churban had already taken place, but it happened in not all in one time. Let's look at the Radak. Perhaps it makes it a little bit clearer. He says over here, just as the vine can be harvested or picked for a second time, the fruit can be removed for a second time. Once, even though it has already been harvested, and in other words, the second wave comes and removes the last grapes left on the vine. So will the enemies of Am Yisrael do. The remnants of Am Yisrael are like the few grapes left on the vine. Each one of the enemies will say to his colleague, Hashev yadecha lavoz ולשלול כמו שהוא בוסר ומשים בסלסלים ומשיב ידו פעם אחר פעם עד שיורה לגפן כולה. In other words, don't leave anything. Go back and destroy it completely. Don't leave anything standing. Pasuk Yod. Al mi adabra wa'ida v'yishma'u. To whom can I speak? Hine arela oznam. Their ears are uncircumcised. They cannot hear. V'lo yuchlu lahakshiv. They're not capable of listening. Hine devar Adonai haya lahem laharpa lo yahpasu vo. Fairly straightforward, but let's look at the Targum nevertheless. Pasuk Yod over here. Al man amalel washed v'yikablun ulfan. To whom can I speak? People who can actually hear. Ulfan is teaching. To v'yikablun ulfan. People who are capable of hearing what I have to say. This is Yirmiyahu speaking. Ha it pashath udnahon. Their ears literally are unable to receive information. ולא יכלין למסף הפתגמד אדוני, אבל להון לחיסודין מדלה סבן בה. The word of Hashem to them is something disgusting, something they don't want to hear. In other words, they are so so prejudiced against hearing anything to do with Hashem that whatever I will say, lo yahpasu vo, they will not want to hear. They will not want. They're incapable of hearing. In recent days, we had an example of this in the news here. The relatively new head of the Shabak, David Zini, made it known that he does not shake hands with women. And of course, certain people immediately pounced on this as proof that he is a chauvinist. How it's chauvinistic, I do not know, because there are plenty of women who don't shake hands with men as well. It doesn't follow, but it's primitive and it's disgusting and it's how can we have a head of a Shabbat who doesn't shake hands with women? This is what some certain types of people state. Why do they say such inane things? Obviously, it's unimportant in terms of security, in terms of the job he is supposed to do, whether he shakes hands with women or not. Or in fact, it's more likely that he'll be focused on what he's supposed to focus if he doesn't shake hands with women rather than if he does. But certainly it cannot in any way have a negative impact on his success in his designated job. The reason that some people immediately hear such a thing and lose it completely is because, as it says here, Devar Hashem haya lahem lahirpa. Anything to do with Hashem, with the Torah, halacha, is a hirpa, is something disgusting, is something which they cannot bear. It's as if it's something which reeks of some terrible odor and they can't bear it. Lo yahpasuvo, they cannot possibly even hear of such a thing. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, Ved Hamath Adonai Malethi Nil'ethi Achil Shafoch al Olal Bahus Va'al Sod Bahurim Yahdaw Ki Gam Ish Im Isha Yilachedu Zaken Im Mele Yamim. So the Navi Yirmiyahu here expresses his inability to witness and to accept what he sees. He sees his people behave and think and speak in such ways, and therefore he says in the Targum in Yud Aleph, "V'yaf nevuah v'itkof min kadam Adonai itmelefi." And therefore I am full of and consumed with the nevuah, with the harsh words of Hashem, Hamath Hashem, right? The anger of Hashem. Malethi, I'm full of it. Nil'ethi achil, I cannot. It's overflowing. Shafoch alolal bahus al sod bahurim yahdaw. In other words, the Targum says, Itmelethi le'ethi lesovara. I'm unable to bear it. V'lo yechelit lemishpach. ולא יחליף למשפח על יונקין בשוקה ועל שיעת ולמין כחדה הרי אף גבר עם איתה יתאחדון סב עם דסבע יומין. In other words, the evil is going to come down upon all the people, from the young to the old, and it is more than I can bear to even imagine what is going to happen. He goes on to say, وَنَصَبُوا ذَتَيْهَمْ لَاحِرِيمْ صَدَوْث وَنَشِيمْ يَحْدَوْ كِي أَبْتَأَتْ يَدِي عَلْ يُشَبَيْهَ أَرَيْتْ نُمْ أَذُنَيْ. Targum states, وَيِسْتَحَرُونَ بَتَيْهُنَ أَحَرَنِينَ. Their houses will become the property of others. Haklan unshin, fields and women folk, kahda, and their fields and their women will be taken over by others. Arem yath mahath gevurti al yathave ara amar Adonai, because I shall bring down my hand against the inhabitants of this land. And why is this so? Pasuk Yud Gimel. Ki miketanam wa'ad gadolam kulo bosa bosa. Because all of them, from young to old, they are all um, they all all their thoughts and their actions are directed towards basa. Basa is money. In other words, money gained not properly, not legally or in a acceptable fashion. Uminavi wa'ad kohen kulo osa shaka. Here again, this refers to what we heard before. We spoke about the Nevi'im and the Kohanim. The Nevi'im refers to Nevi'ei Sheker, of course, as the Targum says in Pasuk Yud Gimel. Are mizrahon wa'ad rabahon, from the small to the great. Kulahon and Semamon, they all steal and embezzle money. Umisafar wa'ad kahin. Safar here, the Targum doesn't use the word for a Navi Sheker, he doesn't use the word Nevi'ah, he uses the word Safar, like a Sofer. In other words, the more educated class, those the scribes, Wa'ad Kahin and Kohanim Kulahon Avadeh Shekar, they are all dishonest and perverse. So it's describing a very, very, very corrupt society. In other words, you have to understand something like the Khurban that does not happen without good reason. And the Navi is describing the reason. A Hevra, a society which is the character of which is so corrupt, cannot expect to live out its days peacefully. The Shadal over here, if you see over here, you see the Shadal? Basa basa, rodafim ahar hana'at asmam. Their lives, their actions, their thoughts are all about thinking and seeking their own pleasure and benefit. Ba'en hashkaha lahana'at haviram. They think never of anyone else, only of themselves. In other words, people who think only of themselves and not about what is correct and what about other people, etc., that kind of outlook on life results in a completely corrupt society. Yov Daled, Pasuk Yov Daled, וירפאו את שבר עמי על נקלה לאמור שלום שלום ואין shalom. But again, the false prophets and the self-appointed wise men who know everything and tell everyone what they should think and how to behave, they will tell you, of course, that things will be fine. Do not be concerned. He says in the Targum, "Wa'asiyu," which means to heal. Asa is a doctor. Wa'asiyu yattavar kenishta da'ami. They try and heal the great malady of my people. B'mile shikrahon, with their words of sheker and memar shalama shalama waleth shalom. They claim that things will be fine, there will be peace, things will be all right. Do not listen to those who tell you that the way you behave will also decide what happens to you, whether good things or terrible things will happen to you and your family and your society and your nation. Do not believe them. Things will be fine. Shalom, shalom, wa'en shalom. Brings to mind something like shalom achshav. Things will be fine. We have the solution to everything. Don't overthink it. We figured it out for you. Hovishu, pasuk tetwa, hovishu, ki tu'ivasu, gam bosh lo yevoshu, gam hachlim lo yada'u. They should be ashamed of themselves, but they haven't even got the integrity and the wisdom to be ashamed. החלים לא ידעו, לכן יפלו לנופלים בעת פקדתים ייכשלו, אמר אדוני. And therefore their downfall will come at the time that I have appointed. The Targum says, Alehon lemibhath, they should be very concerned and they should be embarrassed. Alehon lemibhath ared to'iva avadu, they have done such unspeakable things. Af mibhath leth inun bahatin, but they are not ashamed and they are not astounded at themselves. Af ithkuna'u let inun yad'in, they don't even know how to leikana lifnei Hashem, ithkuna'u. In other words, they don't know how to even admit that they've gone astray. And therefore, b'chen yithramon ketilin be'idan da'asar alehon havehon yitakelun amar Adonai. And therefore their corpses shall be everywhere, all over the earth. That is the very, very harsh but frank and honest nevuah of Yirmiyahu. You can understand why not many people wanted to hear him out.
Yeah.
Wasn't very popular. Only with a small minority, apparently. And again, that's not unusual. That is often the way of things.
Yeah.
And why today that Am Yisrael should also be more able to hear the truth. We shall stop here for today.
Very good.
Baruchim, Hizku, V'yames Lebavchem, Kol HaMeyahalim L'Adonai. Shalom, v'nisach.
Shalom.